Well, I'm probably not. I don't know if I'm the right person to answer that question or not. But I'm always happy to dive in on the subject of sex. So maybe that makes me. I guess that I would. Maybe we ought to ask the women and the men in the audience the question. But I don't really think about a target audience when I'm writing.
Actually, the way that I got to, well, I do think keenly about my target audience.
Because you're a business guy.
No, because,
as opposed to a legal guy.
I don't think it's for that reason. I think you're right about the statistics. I'm not sure if it's quite 75, but maybe it's 6 to 65. But certainly in commercial fiction, it's women's driven. I mean, I'm a guy that got to Patterson originally because someone sent a manuscript, an unpublished manuscript of mine years ago to him with the words, "This guy does women well" on the cover. So I suspect what he meant was that I write women characters well. Although every once in a while I do sort of think, maybe.
I already saw your apparel catalog.
But
okay, moving right along.
The truth is, I try to write for women in mind. My last book was about, you read it, and about a conspiracy that leads into the financial meltdown. But I don't, you don't need an MBA to read my books. I mean, what I want to do actually, and this sounds sort of, I'm going to say something that'll be, I'll probably claw my way out of, but I'm writing finance from the perspective of a woman, in the sense that I'm not trying to overload it on detail. I'm not trying to make you an expert in anything. I just want to create the context to make the conspiracy real more than I really think it has to be edifying. So to me, I don't know, you did mention sex, and we never quite got there. But nonetheless, I think I think if you're trying, I mean, all my books have hit the bestseller list, and if you're trying to be a commercial author, you have to write with your target audience in mind, whether you're a business person or whether you want to be successful as an author.
Michael?
We're still on sex?
Yeah, we're going to get it.
Well, we want a clinical perspective on it.
You're talking to the author whose friends describe the sex in my books as puppy love. The truth is, and I've heard this topic discussed at thriller seminars many times, the real problem that I have in considering whether to write sex in my books is that writing a thriller is 90+% pacing. Everything is pacing. And I read my books over and over again. I actually end up grading the chapters in my books because of the amount of tension in each of the chapters to get a sense of exactly what the book is doing. And the real problem is if you're going to stop a thriller to have characters have sex, you very often go from this to this. No matter how much people like what you're writing, it's very hard to maintain the tension of the thriller itself. There's certainly ways to do it, and there's many wonderful thriller writers who can do it. I tend to not do it. And once in a while when I see a situation really come up that screams to include something between this couple, maybe to strengthen their relationship because I'm going to put one of the two of them in extreme jeopardy, then I'll go ahead and try to do it. But then I'm going to do it in such a way that it doesn't interfere with the pacing of what I've written before.
Don't you think that sexual tension is a page-turning element?
I think sexual tension can happen without sex.
Yeah.
And certainly I've gone for that a number of times, but I don't know that I'm that good at it.
See, as guys, we've been taught to try to take the pace out of sex, so it goes against
So let's talk about these big scenes. All right, this brings up a good point. I read a lot of thrillers, and the big scenes are usually not about sex. What I'd like to know is, Steve, we'll go back to you. When you write a big scene, is it fact, something that you saw during your career as an attorney, or is it fiction, something that you've created?
It's usually a blend. I would guess that, although this is just a guess, most writers of fiction will tell you that to create characters, certainly to create characters and maybe to create specific scenes, there's some element of drawing on personal experience that has to play in. So it's a matter of degrees to the extent that that occurs. What I try to do, though, is I try to draw sufficiently from my own experience that it reads in an authentic fashion to someone who might have actually been in the room, you know, at a critical scene, at a critical time. You know, some decision maybe that was made at a big firm, or some decision that was made at a company about how to deal with a particular problem. So that's probably the best way I would describe it.
I'd be interested in what, I would say that the best sex scene that I can remember ever reading in a thriller is the scene in Eye of the Needle, between the needle and the woman on the little island, Kate Nelligan in the movie. And I wondered, are there scenes that stick out in your mind?
I don't know. What's the definition of big scene anyway? I mean, is it an action scene, or is it the scene that sort of hinges where the plot? I mean, what Michael said is actually it's funny. I don't know if we've ever discussed this. So if we have, I guess there was a reason that maybe we did. When I worked with Jim, we used to chart our chapters. And I think this is an I don't know if there's any aspiring authors out there, but I think it's an incredibly useful exercise, because if you're writing a pace-driven book, and not all thrillers are pace-driven, so there's, you know, a lot of ways to skin the cat, and people get, you know, have their own levels of what they look for in a book. But if you're writing a pace-driven book, you don't want to go 5 or 6 chapters. We used to chart high chapters, low chapters, and then chapters that just delivered the mail, which usually means information. You're just trying to get from point A to point C, and somehow you have to logistically get there. But we used to chart them for drama or lack of drama, you know. And his rule is, one, every book needed 4 great scenes, whatever definition, but great memorable scenes. But every 4 or 5 chapters, and obviously in his world, that could be every 7 or 8 pages. You know, you needed that sort of up dramatic chapter that either delivered a great clue, or had a reversal, or had something. So it's sort of what you were talking about there, and I just think it's. I mean, I certainly look at my own books that way in terms of, you know, there isn't. I don't really believe in a great scene. I mean, you know, for a book to be successful, it probably has to have 4 or 5 great scenes, you know.
Now that lesson that you just said, for me, goes back to my very first book with my very first editor, who was a legend in the business. She's since passed away, but so this is my very first book, and I said to her, Linda, I'm really worried about this book. I don't think there's enough action in this book. And she looked at me patiently and said, you know, Michael, we're not paying you to write action. We're paying you to write tension. Yeah. And if you can't figure out the difference between action and tension, you're not going to last very long in this business. And the notion, I figured it out almost on my own, to start giving numbers to the chapters in terms of the amount of tension. Action doesn't equate with tension. And that's just what Andy was saying.
You know, I think that's a great point, Michael. I had this discussion with Peter James, who is #1 selling author worldwide, and he was just #1 in the United Kingdom for his novel. I think it was Dead Like You. And I asked him about these big scenes and the sequencing, and I asked it in the context of, do you outline your books? Because every time you get into discussion about writing books, somebody says, well, do you outline, or do you just sit down and you're brilliant? And so what Peter did is he pulled out, this was really the coolest thing, he pulled out his BlackBerry. I can't do it on mine. I have no idea how he did it. And he drew a chart. And you see the chart that I have? It's kind of a chart, you know, a little cliff. And he said, I spent a lot of time at the start writing the opening, and I spent a lot of time at the end. But in the middle, I don't outline. What I do is I try to create tension and increase the stakes 3 times, and he has 3 peaks, and it just gets to your point.